Hello, and happy, sad, actually, Easter Monday to all those in the Catholic world who were celebrating and now mourning. That's a weird way to switch things up, but you are tuned in to the TMI Show, the Ted Manila Information Show. I am Manila Chan. That over there is Ted Rall on this Monday, April the 21st. Today, we are doing something a little different given the breaking news this morning that Pope Francis has passed away at the age of 88. So we'll be talking about that the first half of the show. And a little bit later, at about the halfway mark, at about 10:30, friend of the show, Jim Jatras, will be joining us to discuss the pre-Easter ceasefire that was kind of the surprise announcement from the Kremlin, Ted, ahead of the Easter holiday. And I was a bit confused by that too, because Ted, I'm always confused by the Orthodox calendar. Do they also I think they celebrate Easter at the same time?
They do not. No.
They don't?
They have a different Easter. I think sometimes it can be at the same time, but they have a different calendar. So I'm not 100% sure about this, but I'm more than 50% sure. I'm pretty sure it's a different Easter.
Oh, yeah. I know that they have Christmas in January, the first week of January. But I wondered if maybe they had one overlapping holiday with the Gregorian calendar. I don't know.
Yeah, they are different. It's known, Orthodox Easter is known as Pascha. And this is because the Eastern Orthodox Church uses the Julian calendar.
Right.
Western churches use the Gregorian calendar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
typically Orthodox Easter is later.
Huh. Weird, because Vladimir Putin, and we have video of this, was at, it looked like it was midnight mass. I mean, as Catholics, you're familiar with this, Ted. I used to go to this as a kid, and the church I went to, they used to do the whole carrying of the cross and this whole ceremony outside of the church grounds. It was like this whole thing at midnight mass. And it looked like Vladimir Putin was at one of them. So I thought maybe, unless he was there, for the Catholics, maybe, since he's the president and Russia is a multi-religious country, a multi-ethnic country.
Mm-hmm.
Could be. I don't know, but I thought it was at an Orthodox church. Could be wrong. But we'll discuss that in the back half of the show.
There's about 800,000 Roman Catholics in the Russian Federation. So it's not, it's a small minority, really. I mean, because it's a huge country.
Yeah, huge country. What do they have? 140 million people?
Yes, that's correct. 144 million.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the majority of them are Orthodox Christians.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's
vast majority.
It's I'm looking up the numbers here. So yeah, Eastern Orthodox is by far the most. So number 2 is Islam.
Really?
Yeah. Well, that's particularly in southern Russia, right? They have a lot of
that makes sense.
Muslims, right? They had more when it was the Soviet Union because all the Stan countries.
Yes.
Of course, those are mostly liberal, Muslims who drink and smoke, and the girls wear mini skirts and stuff. So it's entirely different, right? It's like, and then there's also Buddhism. A lot of Jews and various Protestant denominations also. So Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that on the
Orthodox Christians are 62% of the country.
Wow.
So that's a pretty big majority. That's a sizable majority.
Yeah. So we'll be talking more in depth about that. The ceasefire.
10% Muslims.
Huh. That's a pretty sizable amount. I'm kind of surprised. Way more than Catholics.
Yeah, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. Catholics are a small minority, for sure.
In Russia, for sure. Okay.
Yeah, well, and for obvious reasons. I mean, this is due to the schism between the Western and Eastern Roman empires, and Russia is an heir to the Eastern Empire and heir. Yeah.
Well, with that, make sure you guys hit the like and the subscribe button wherever you're consuming this content, please, to help us grow this little channel. We're going to try to be the little channel that could. We're live Monday through Friday at.
We want to be the big channel that did.
Yes, we would like that very much. So please hit that like button. And we will now just get into this Pope Francis thing, given that Ted wrote a damn book about it.
I did. And I have a new book out, by the way. Very important. It arrived over the weekend. Here it is. It's here.
Look at it. That's
what's left.
I like the cover.
Thank you.
I thought it was dropping on the 1st.
It is, but I got my advanced copies. So that's what it looks like. And basically, if you're wondering, this is basically what it looks like inside. So it's like mostly words with some illustration. Yeah, but it's like, if you're looking for a bunch of cartoons, this is not that book.
Right.
This is a book about how the left should define itself. Like what issues it should care about and like what it should think about those issues. So it's about organizing around ideas first, because nobody really knows what the left believes in. Ideas. So the left needs to get together. They don't have to have my ideas, but they need to. This is how we do it. Like they can all get together and maybe say, oh, Ted's ideas suck. But the point is that we need to have a set of ideas.
Okay, good stuff. I'm happy to see a copy of your book in your hands. It looks good. So let's go ahead and hit the jaws, and we'll talk about this whole breaking news about Pope Francis. Just a lot to get to before our guest comes on. So let's do it.
Francis, the Catholic Church's first Latin American pope, has died, obviously, at the age of 88. He rose from a humble childhood in Argentina to become the leader of the world's largest and most powerful church. He died at about 7:30 a.m. local time in Rome. He had recently, of course, spent 5 weeks in hospital for pneumonia. He had appeared yesterday for Easter services in St. Peter's Square in a wheelchair in order to bless tens of thousands of people who showed up there. So this comes as kind of a surprise. Last week, he visited a prison in Rome, not for the first time. He told inmates he wanted to be close to you. I pray for you and your families. For 12 years, Francis led more than 1 billion Catholics around the world and tried to make Catholicism more inclusive. He clashed with traditional conservatives as he reached out to migrants, gay Catholics, and victims of sexual abuse in the pedophile priest scandals. He cracked down on the pedophile priests and those who covered up also, which is, better late than never. He also tried to improve relations with other religions, including Muslims. He criticized the rich and powerful for fucking up the climate and called for an end to wars. He filled Catholic leadership with bishops who, of course, reflected his point of view. And no matter what happened, he really kind of never changed his approach. He was born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Buenos Aires.
Bergoglio. Italian name. No, second G is soft. Bergoglio.
Bergoglio, I see. In Buenos Aires on December 17th, 1936. Bookish, intelligent, and deeply religious, he also played basketball and loved to dance the tango. And apparently he was a bit of a ladies' man, as I learned when I was researching his biography that I wrote called Francis the People's Pope. It's a short, sort of graphic novel style, although it's all true, biography of the Pope. It's called Francis the People's Pope. You can get it on Amazon or at your local bookstore. Highly recommended at this time. To see how relevant and important he was. Just before his 17th birthday, he was rushing off to meet some friends when he decided to go into the Basilica of St. Joseph in Buenos Aires. He said that he felt like someone grabbed me from inside, and right there, I knew I had to be a priest. Bergoglio was ordained as a Jesuit priest in 1969. Now, Jesuits emphasize humility, helping the poor, and respecting indigenous people. They're also intellectuals who believe in science. So they, for example, Jesuits believe in, evolution, and they think that like God sort of set those processes into motion, but they believe in science. They don't really think that the earth is like 8,000 years old. They think that, basically that God be creating the everything in 6 days is sort of poetry more than it is, hard, cold calendar facts. Anyway, as he rose up through the ranks in order to become a cardinal, he continued to be humble. He cooked his own meals in the Vatican, always took the bus to work from his apartment, and he also got a reputation for being a tough but effective manager. He also cracked down, and this is a chapter of his life that people probably are going to skip, but there was a big, you probably remember this, Manila, there was a huge financial scandal, the Vatican Bank, remember that?
Yes.
And he was the guy who was put in charge by the Vatican to go after the guys who'd been robbing the church blind and to crack down on them. So, he's kind of like, he's nice, but he's tough. Anyway, that reputation helped him become Pope. In 2013, Pope Benedict XVI, who I think is still alive, right?
No. He passed.
He passed.
2 years ago?
But he was like a Pope. He was Pope Emeritus,
Pope
right?
Emeritus.
Pope Emeritus. Yeah, he just sort of was like ex-Pope, very unusual situation, but he was still alive.
Because he retired. That's not...
Usually,
you're supposed to be Pope for life, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg as SCOTUS.
That's right. So he became the first Pope to step down like that in 6 centuries. The Vatican was in crisis.
Well, not ever.
Well, and cardinals wanted someone who was firm in order to steer the church. They elected Bergoglio, a surprising successor because he was a lot more progressive than Benedict, who was a former member of the Hitler Youth. He took his papal name from St. Francis of Assisi, the friar who dedicated his life to piety in the poor and also animals, right? And the J.D. Vance was at the Vatican for Easter celebrations, and he was...
I thought I'd put that in there.
He was the last major, bold-faced public figure to meet with the Pope. Unfortunately for the Pope, it was a full moon in Rome. And
Isn't that bizarre?
And J.D. Vance did transmogrify into werewolf mode. He ate the Pope, which is sad, But it wasn't anybody's fault. I mean, no one can say they didn't know that J.D. Vance was a werewolf.
Werewolves do what werewolves do.
Look at him. I mean, that's a werewolf. If that's not a werewolf, there are no werewolves.
This is so... How bizarre I know it's horrible, weird timing for J.D. Vance to have been like the last like political figure to meet with him. And I don't know what to make of that. But yeah, when I was watching at least the scenes from the Vatican yesterday. I didn't see. Well, JD Vance was not outside, or I think he came later, obviously after the Pope quasi-hosted mass, because he was not fully well. I was surprised that he showed up. It was kind of like, oh my goodness. But he's been on oxygen tanks. He's
he suffered from asthma for many years. Yeah.
And he had half his lung removed when he was a young boy or young man, like
Believe
teenager.
me, I feel for him, because I have rotten lungs, and it's not being able to breathe. It's just one of the worst things. It's just so rough.
Breathing is kind of a necessity. So when he came down with pneumonia,
that means he couldn't outrun the werewolf.
No, when he came down, well, he was on, like, here. That was the image from yesterday that we're seeing. Those were real AP images from Easter services. Easter Mass on Sunday, but he was in a wheelchair. Obviously, you can't huff and puff and walk through and then, give any sort of benediction. Obviously, he's not well, but he had that pneumonia, and I felt so bad for him because, I just got over it myself, like by the end of January of this year, right? Like, I mean, I was really bad with it in December, but I could only imagine what an old man's body with 1.5 lungs, what that must have felt like. If I was in the kind of pain that I was in, I can only imagine what it must be like to be housed in an 88-year-old body with half a lung missing. Like this, I hope he passed in peace. It's just very sad. It's a very sad, but kind of poetic, Ted, that it's Easter Monday. It's the holy season for Catholics.
That's true. Although it's kind of like the antithesis, right? Because this is this is a loss, and it would have,
right.
And Easter is about resurrection and birth, and
right?
renewal.
So, could that also be representative of this? That he's, that he's passing and he's going to heaven on Easter Monday. Like that's, I think, how a lot of Catholics.
Is this Easter Monday? I thought is this really Easter Monday, or was last Monday Easter Monday?
No, this is Easter Monday.
So is tomorrow Easter Tuesday?
So the church will be, the church traditionally in Rome celebrates stuff, obviously the 40 days and 40 nights, and more so in the week before and the week after Easter. And this week was supposed to be, or this coming weekend was supposed to be, a very special weekend, because they were about to canonize the first millennial saint. He was to become Saint Carlo Acutis, a young Italian-British boy who died of leukemia when he was 15. He passed, all the sainthood tests, if you will.
Yeah.
And that was kind of remarkable. And his body has been held in repose in Rome for many years. And they were going to canonize him this weekend after the Easter festivities. And that's being suspended because they expect the Pope's funeral service to be sometime probably this weekend. So they're moving pretty quickly. I think they knew, All
right. So we'll keep talking about this. But for now, just a quick ad. Weak coffees for the weekend at Rumble. Weak has never been part of the mission. No fillers, no fraud, and no settling for mediocrity. Just like 1775 coffee. It's single origin, small farm, hand-picked specialty grade coffee that stands for quality, free speech, and calling out BS when it matters. Forget stale, mass-produced beans roasted just enough to hide the flaws. Dark roast hits like a Trump tariff. Medium roast keeps it bold without the bitterness. And Vitality Mushroom Blend, real energy and lasting focus. No synthetic garbage. For K-Cup pods, whole bean or fresh ground coffee, go to 1775coffee.com. Use code STUDIO for 15% off and start your morning with coffee that stands for something. Oh, and every dollar spent enters you to win a Cybertruck and $30,000 cash. So, look, I think it's important to realize that what a radical departure Francis was, and how he was really just the right pope for the right time. I mean, Roman Catholics had been, Catholicism had been losing membership for parishioners for years. Part of it was the pedophile priest thing. Part of it was just a general, moving away from organized religion for a long time. And it really seemed like, and then, Francis really did put the brakes on. He staunched the bleeding. And I don't know that the Catholic Church really, that the cardinals really understand how lucky they were to have him. And but the point is, I worry that they're going to go back to like a conservative pope, like like a sort of John Paul II, who was a right-wing pope, and or someone like that. But that's not what the church needs. They really, to move boldly into the 21st century, they need someone vigorous who's going to continue Francis's legacy. I don't know that they're going to do that. They might also, I do think we may see the woke pope, right? They may finally decide to have a pope of color, an African pope, hopefully not one of the wacky ones who's married with kids. Those cardinals.
Yeah, that's like, very not
cool, but
not traditional Catholic.
It has happened. It's not unprecedented. And it's happened recently. Saying. But anyway, the point is, no, they're not going to do that. But I could see them going that direction. I could see a Filipino pope also.
I was just
very easily.
I think one of the cardinals in I thought it was the Philippines. I wasn't sure, but one of the cardinals in the Philippines seemed to be a contender. Apparently, he's been rising through the ranks. I don't remember his name, but I have seen him make appearances at big events. That could be a big deal as well. This was a big deal, I think, for a lot of people in Latin America, because Pope Francis, as a boy, Jorge, he came from Latin America, and it was and that's where a huge, I would dare say the major contingent of the Roman Catholic worshipers are Latin American. Mm-hmm. So for them to see him ascend to, becoming the Holy Father, that was, I think, a big deal for reviving the energy within the Catholic following in Latin America. I think,
for sure,
for a while it was dropping off the map. And even here in the U.S., obviously, made Catholicism cool again.
Well, because it seemed more relevant. He was talking about how correctly there's no doctrinal reason for there not to be women priests, and in fact, there were historically women priests, centuries ago. There's a lot. He also questioned celibacy. There's nothing at all in Scripture that indicates that priests should not be allowed to get married, and in fact, in Protestant denominations, they do. They do. Jewish rabbis get married.
I'm not sure. We can ask our guests, but I think Orthodox Christian. I think in Orthodox Christian Church, I think they can get married.
I don't know about that.
I'm not sure
if priestly celibacy is required there. But I'm sure we can find out. Anyway, the point is, I think these are all areas where the church really does need to modernize, or at least consider modernization. And certainly, Pope Francis was very clear about LGBT. He was like, he does understand the difference between gender and sex. He never believed that, a person who was born one sex would biologically become a different sex, but he would respect their gender identification. So, there's a lot to like with this Pope. For a guy who was 88 years old, he was very forward-looking and very modern. And my favorite Pope Francis quote was when he wrote about, or he was asked about it in an interview about, whether you should give money to a drunkard. Like, let's say you meet a homeless person and you're worried about giving them money because they'll just spend the money on booze or drugs or whatever. And he's like, that's not for you to decide. If a glass of wine is what that guy needs to get through the night, then you should give him the money so he can have a glass of wine. I just thought that was a super interesting response.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that, and I thought, oh, well, that's kind of it's true and kind of fair. There's part, if you don't want to give the money, then don't give the money. But when you give the money, you're relinquishing control of that money, and if you're doing it because you believe in, being a good Christian and offering somebody, just the offering, the act of offering is in and of itself a Christian act, right? So, you kind of have to relinquish control as soon as you let go of that dollar bill. Or in these days, $5, Ted, because if you're in DC, the homeless ain't taking a dollar bill from you.
Yeah, a dollar's a little sad, I mean, it is.
Can't buy much for the buck in DC.
No, you really can't. All right. So I think it's going to be, we're going to obviously follow this story. We're going to try to get a Catholic expert to come on the show later in the week. We talked about that.
Yeah.
To talk about like what happens next in terms of succession and the future of the Roman Catholic Church. What does it look like? So, we'll be talking about that. Right now, I think it's about focusing on the loss, and I'm very sad about this. I know, 88 years old. I mean, that's a long life. You if you get anybody lives that long, they've had a good run.
Long
but
good life.
But still, the church really did need him, and particularly at a time when look, the papacy is a very political post.
Yes.
And at a time when global politics has been moving to the far right. I mean, just before we went on the air, the story broke about two German tourists, 18 and 19-year-old girls, being arrested and strip searched and jailed while trying to become tourists in Hawaii. They flew from Germany to Hawaii, and they were Borders and Customs Enforcement basically gave them, the treatment that they would have had at home in 1933. They got the Nazi treatment, but courtesy of the US of A. So as our politics kind of like move to the far right in countries like Hungary and France, and they move to the far right, it's sad to think that we might see the Catholic Church also moving to the right.
Well, I mean, I had some disagreements with this particular. Again, I'm considered, I would say, a bad Catholic, a non-practicing Catholic, and not that I don't abide by the tenets of the religion, but there were things I fundamentally disagreed on with how kind of, we call him the woke Pope, right? There are some things that I disagreed with his position on, but for the most part,
like what?
Like I did not like I like the Jesuit background. I think that's wonderful, mm-hmm. and that you should focus on the poor and the needy and all of that. But I think he could have been stronger on the whole position of gender ideology, and not to condemn them and say you're going to hell, but to just take a stronger position without condemnation. I feel like he really threaded that needle really well, though. As I described, I mean, he did pretty good, much better.
He sided with science. Pope. He sided with science while saying, look, if you're born a woman, your genes still say you're a woman, or vice versa. And sided also with tolerance and understanding for people who whose gender is not the gender that they had at birth. I mean, I think that's the place where anyone reasonable should land.
I don't mind gay marriage. It's not for me. That's why I'm not gay married. But his position on gay marriage as well.
I would love to be gay married. Are you kidding?
It's shocking.
Like all my gay friends. I mean, I had like these gay friends who lived, on the same floor as me.
They're now
I'd hang out with them, and they had the best life. No, they're totally still married. They had the best life because literally, gay marriage is awesome. They're literally like, hey, so. Hey, it's halftime during this happened. Hey, so halftime during the football game. Hey, Ted, would you mind getting lost? We're going to fuck during halftime. And then we'll come back over and we'll have a beer. It was like awesome. It's like also they'd be like, hey, we invited a couple of cute young guys over to fuck over the weekend. It's awesome. They're like so relaxed. They have a great time. They have all the pros. They have all the advantages of being wild and single. And all the fun of being married.
My gay friends are not like that. I guess they're a little more conservative.
They're just not talking to you about it.
Maybe I've never been witness to behavior like that within the gay community. And I'm from Los Angeles.
No, that's because they're not. Because I see the way you react when I say that. That's why they know you. They're like, don't tell Manila. Don't tell Manila that we're porking.
I've never witnessed that kind of behavior, and
if I could be attracted to dudes, I would be all over it because it's so easy. There's no drama. You're just guys hanging out and having sex.
back to how the Pope handled it. I'm not saying I agree or disagree. I'm kind of, if you're going to follow the church, you follow what the Holy Father says. And his position on it was surprising to me, though, was that he stopped short of approving of gay marriage, but he said that he would bless those unions. So it was kind of
that's pretty approving.
That's
right. Being wishy-washy is kind of the job when you're, say, the president of the United States or like the Pope of the Catholic Church.
Now, Pope Benedict was like, nope, no.
Yeah, no, that's why he was like the Nazi Pope.
But this, he's like, no, he took a firm line and said, this is not part of the doctrine. This is not what the church supports. So there's that. So anyway, we got to wind it down because we're coming to the half-hour mark. We got to bring in our guest to talk about the other story. Again, we'll be following this story about what's happening with the biggest and most powerful church in the world and biggest landowner, we should add. The Catholic Church, people don't realize this, is by far the biggest landowner in land on every country, every continent. Catholic Church, Roman Catholic Church owns a big chunk of property. You can look this up. I did a whole story on this. People thought Great Britain had a lot of colonies, that Queen Elizabeth owned a lot of property. By far, leaps and bounds, the Catholic Church. So this is by far one of the most powerful institutions in the world. And we will definitely be watching this to see the new direction of this church. So again, sad news, Pope Francis dead at the age of 88. So there's that. All right, let's hit the jaws and get into our other topic.
Freaky belated jaws. Okay, so as you may or may Blinken, you miss it, and maybe you missed it. There was a temporary ceasefire announced over Easter weekend by President Putin of the Russian Federation, effective April 19th through 20th, just Saturday and Sunday. According to, depending on who you talk to, the ceasefire was violated. Ukrainian President Zelenskyy claimed that Russia violated the ceasefire 3,000 times, including shelling and drone attacks. Russia ups the ante, says that Ukraine violated the truce 4,900 times, saying that the regime there in Kyiv also attacked Russia with drones and shells. Both sides, however, said, after the truce expired, we are fighting. No view on whether they were fighting a lot less during the ceasefire or not. Negotiations between Trump, Russia, and Ukraine are ongoing about energy infrastructure. In other words, having a ceasefire against hitting things like oil refineries. That's effective from March 25th. And apparently that ceasefire, that sort of partial ceasefire, is holding. So Ukraine did accept a proposed 30-day comprehensive ceasefire for everything, but Russia had said no. Meanwhile, there's a maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea, which is supposed to allow ships to pass through without being attacked. But there's some hitches there. Russia said that it will only implement its side of the bargain when Western sanctions go away. Ukraine said, well, we don't know if we're going to agree to that or not. Not that it's up to them to agree. And meanwhile, talks are continuing in Saudi Arabia with the Russians and the Ukrainians in separate rooms running back and forth. And we'll see what happens there. There's been some mixed reporting about Marco Rubio, who said basically if there's not a serious movement toward an agreement, the Trump administration is prepared to walk away. Some U.S. sources
mixed reporting. We had Marco Rubio on tape. We showed it on Friday.
Well, there's mixed reporting about what he meant because he basically, some sort of neocon sources like the New York Times, they interpreted that as being pressure on Russia, but it really, when you read the statement, it seems more like it's pressure on Ukraine because the Ukrainians have been more hesitant to make any concessions than the Russians have. So, it sort of depends on who you choose to believe.
Well, let's see if we can believe our guest.
I'm sure we can. So Jim, am I pronouncing it correctly? Jatras is a Washington, D.C. based attorney, political analyst, and media specialist who served as a foreign policy advisor to the U.S. Senate Republican leadership and as a U.S. diplomat in Mexico and Soviet affairs. Currently, he's the deputy director of the American Institute in Ukraine, focusing on international affairs and legislative issues. Jim, thanks for joining us here on the TMI Show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
That's his book right there that just came out a few months ago. I tried to warn you.
Good title.
Collected Works of James George Jatras. So you guys go check that out. That's on Amazon. Any place else they can pick it up, Jim?
Yeah, it's you can get it directly from the printer at lulu.com or Barnes & Noble. It's pretty much anywhere.
Excellent. Yeah, Jim's got a large body of work there, and a lot to say, obviously. First, what are your thoughts, Jim, that there was this surprise announcement by Vladimir Putin ahead of the Easter weekend? You can clarify for us. I believe you're Orthodox Christian.
Yeah, we can get into that with what you all were talking about with Pope Francis.
You can comment. Yes,
we do have married priests. Yes, of course.
And you have different Easter.
Well, this year they actually coincide, but most years they don't. And in fact, Pope Francis and Patriarch Bartholomew were going to say that from this time on, we're going to have the same dating. I don't know how that's going to work out. Actually, your previous discussion was very interesting to me, and maybe we can touch on that as well.
Please.
Frankly, from an Orthodox point of view, a lot of us really liked Pope Francis because every time he opened his mouth, more traditional Catholics became Orthodox. So we were very
Well, there's been all this talk about, it never seems to happen, about reunifying the Western and Eastern Catholic churches, and that just sort of never happens.
It ain't going to happen.
Right.
Yeah, there's
long history there. In fact, the more progressive the Pope is, the more less likely it is to happen, because, of course, Orthodoxy is rather conservative.
Right. Yeah. I could see that.
Yeah. And we're looking at video. There's Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. He was obviously heading the ceremonies that were happening at the Russian church in Moscow, and Vladimir Putin went there. It looked to me like midnight mass, but I don't know if Orthodox do that. But Catholics do that for Easter.
Yeah, our standards, the divine liturgy that occurs after midnight on the night of Pascha, what is called Easter often in the West, that goes on. The service starts around 11:30 and then finishes up around 2 or 3 in the morning, and then we of course generally have a very big feast after that, and then we come back in again in the afternoon on Sunday for another service and another feast. Yeah.
So here it is, Vladimir Putin in Moscow, Russia, April 19th. So similar to a Catholic midnight mass, same kind of thing that was happening there. He called the ceasefire just before he went there. And do you think that any of the church or the religious aspect of this, do you think that had anything to do with the ceasefire, or do you think it had more to do with the day before with Marco Rubio making comments that it seemed like nobody knows, but it seemed like Marco Rubio was saying that if the Russians and the Ukrainians can't come to the table, then we're out of here. We're washing our hands, and you guys have at it.
Oh, I think it had everything to do with Easter, with Pascha. It had nothing to do with Marco Rubio. Look, I mean, how was Rubio's comment a pressure on the Russians? He said, if we don't get an agreement early on, we're going to walk away. And all I can think of from Moscow would be, yes, please do that. Walk away. Go away. Because let's keep in mind what's going on here. This is a proxy war, as Marco Rubio himself has admitted, a proxy war by the United States against Russia using Ukraine as a proxy. If that participation of the Americans in the war stopped, the war is over, because the Ukrainians, who are losing anyway, cannot even maintain the fight against the Russians without support from the West, particularly from the United States. And what's been going on, and this was foreseeable even before Trump took office, is that there's really cross purposes and mutual deception in these talks. The Russians have made it clear they want a comprehensive settlement of their security needs in Europe. They're not interested in a ceasefire. That would be just a Minsk agreement that the other side would not honor. Whereas the other side, predictably, after engaging with the Russians, it seems that for a few weeks in good faith, suddenly switched over, ceasefire, we need a ceasefire immediately, which of course offers the Russians nothing in terms of their interests. So the Russians have been good sports. We'll talk about the grain, we'll talk about the energy infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not really where they want to go. They're simply trying to keep that dialogue going while trying to get to their real point, which would be a settlement, which isn't going to happen through diplomatic means. So I think when it comes to Easter, to Pascha, all that Mr. Putin was saying is, fine, we'll have a 30-hour truce for religious reasons, and that truce is over, and nothing that really has been accomplished in the big picture.
Yeah, we have obviously talking points coming from Volodymyr Zelensky's camp saying that this is just a stunt and this is, but who, according to the White House, they say both sides are kind of being intransigent. Can we believe that?
In a sense, yes. Well, if you look at it from the White House's point of view, if what they want is a freeze, a ceasefire, another phony agreement like Minsk, yes, of course the Russians are being intransigent because they don't want an agreement like that. They're willing to engage in talks with the Americans, but of course they have no interest in signing such an agreement. As far as the Ukrainians, their goals are quite a bit different. They are as they have been all along. They've got to find some way by hook or by crook to get other powers engaged directly into the war, preferably the Americans, but they'll take the Europeans if they can get them. And that's where we have Zelensky very close to Starmer and Macron and people like this who think they can be the stand-up guys to get their forces into Ukraine, even though their forces are a joke. But of course, in their case, they need the backstop from the Americans, and they've made that clear. So there are several different agendas going on here. The Ukrainians want to keep the war going, but they want to drag other powers in. The Russians would rather have a diplomatic settlement, but there isn't going to be one, so they'll keep going with their military effort and agree to something like a truce on grain or infrastructure that makes the Americans happy and they can engage in dialogue. Or they'll declare a truce for religious reasons here, which I think are actually genuine on the part of the Kremlin. And then, of course, the Americans are trying to find some way to put this war on hold, not suffer a total defeat for the West in Ukraine while they turn their sights on Iran or China, whatever else is next on their list.
Yeah. Ted, do you want to get in there?
Yeah.
I've got tons of questions.
Yeah, no, so do I. So I guess, we were all hoping that hoping against hope that Trump would be able to bring an end to this conflict as quickly as possible, as he had promised to do. He said, "Oh, I can end it all in a day." Well, it's been more than a day, but obviously it hasn't been that long. It's only, he's only been president now for 3 months. What are the prospects here? What is he likely to be able to get these two sides to come to terms, or is this just going to drag on?
The short answer is it's going to continue militarily. The chances there actually be, unless the Russians wake up in the morning and all take their stupid pills and succumb to another fake peace presented by the West, where they essentially forego their larger strategic aims to provide for their security on their western border and say, we're going to settle for another Minsk agreement, another deception sold as a peace agreement that the other side has no intention of honoring. Unless that happens, the Russians will have no choice but to continue the war. Now, in terms of whether it's dragging on, that also raises a secondary question, which is, do the Russians shift from their military strategy they've followed up to this point, which is essentially pedagogical, will keep inflicting pain and putting pressure on the Ukrainians till somebody comes to the table and offers a real peace agreement? Or do they finally realize that is never going to happen and simply try to end the war but through a military victory? Which, by the way, they have not really done up to this point. I mean, they've been fighting this war of attrition to basically, as I say, inflict pain in the hopes that somebody will present an agreement, rather than saying, all right, the hell with it. We're going to take out the command and control of the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian state, the Ukrainian army, and end Ukraine's ability to continue with military operations. They haven't done that so far because they seem to keep waiting for somebody to say, okay, finally now we'll meet your terms. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, it looks like it's been, this slow moving, very meticulous, death by 1,000 cuts type action that the Kremlin has been pursuing there. And heaven knows that there is a lot of people on the right of Vladimir Putin saying he has not done enough, and certainly hadn't taken action soon enough in relation to the Donbass and the tragedy that's been happening there for 10 years leading up to this, that everybody in the Western press seems to forget. But the tides have changed, Jim. Not only do we have President Trump back in office, right? That's just one little element, but the tides have changed. Look, I'm going to show you here on the screen. Pew Research just released a new April 17th poll about Republican opinion shifts on Russia-Ukraine war. And of course, they poll Democrats and stuff here too. But it looks like now, if you're looking at just the Democrats or Democrat-leaning people, they're 62% still in favor of continuing this war right down here. And Republicans or Republican-leaning, it's the inverse. It's like 60-ish% say Russia's not an enemy. And not only that, but if we go over to the eastern region, the Baltics region, Vladimir Putin is now surrounded with more friendlies. And that's why we're seeing people like in Georgia trying to overturn elections there because they voted wrong. Are we going to see a shift in the tide in coming down on the rest of the European Union when you have people like Viktor Orban and Georgescu, who I assume may become president if they let it, I don't know. But these are friendly and friendly-ish satellite countries around Russia. Will that change the tide with the folks over in the EU?
It may, but it's hard to see how you get from A to B, because you see the guardians of democracy in these countries in the European Union essentially taking action against populism, whereas we have to be on guard against what the people actually want. So if the public opinion continues in that direction, the guardians of democracy will sacrifice democracy in order to maintain their hegemony over their societies. Look, I think maybe to some extent public opinion is finally catching up with reality. There are some people who think that Western hostility toward Russia is some kind of a hangover from the Cold War. Don't they realize the Cold War is over and Russia is no longer communist? Oh, that's not the problem. Look, when I was at the Soviet desk back in the early 1980s, I was one of the few actual anti-communists at the State Department. I mean, most people there had this kind of mushy, liberal, globalist attitude that, Russia's bad, Soviet Union's bad, but that's because, you know how Russians are. At least they have a progressive, globalist, atheist ideology like we do. We can work with these people. As soon as the red flag came down and the Russian flag went back up and it became a more recognizably national, even, God forbid, Christian country in ethos, then they became implacably hostile to Russia because they weren't part of that same globalist woke agenda that was gaining traction in the West. And I think that's part of the split you see in Europe between the East, which is actually in many ways culturally and even religiously more conservative than the Western part of Europe, and why there is this real fear of European leaders that a large part of their population is actually more sympathetic to these traditional values you see in Russia, that, they're not going to salute to the sacred rainbow flag like you have all over Europe and the more progressive parts of the West. So I think that's where it's actually more natural for the more conservative elements in the United States and in Europe to be more open-minded about Russia, and that you have a more leftward progressive opinion who's horrified at the idea of a rapprochement with Russia.
Yeah. And Ted, if you don't mind, I'm going to get producer Robbie in here. He's got a question for Jim. Robbie, bear with me 1 second.
Not a problem. Howdy, Mr. Jim. It's a pleasure to meet you, sir.
Howdy. Likewise.
No, just one thing about what you just now said. As the sole conservative here on the show, I agree with what you just now said. I am very sympathetic to Russia because they represent my values more than the woke government here in the United States does. So you're spot on. So I have two questions. One, with President Trump basically picking a trade war with the entire planet, can he afford to continue this proxy war with Russia? And if he is able to, what does the United States gain from a proxy war with Russia? To me, it doesn't make any sense.
The United States has never gained anything from a proxy war with Russia. And I don't know whether we can afford to rub two kopecks together on anything, much less a war with Russia or a war with China or even a war with Iran. So it has nothing to do with the cost-benefit analysis in the conventional sense. The long and the short of it is that when the wall came down in the early 1990s and the Warsaw Pact fell apart, in any normal world, we should have gone back to a pre-1914 kind of balance of power that existed throughout most of the 19th century. Instead, what you had was the establishment in Washington say, great, it's no longer a bipolar world. It can be unipolar. We can rule the whole world. Yay. What's not to like? Basically, as Russia and China, Iran, North Korea, other countries emerged as a pole of resistance to that unipolarity, there's, I think, an increasing desperation in the Washington establishment that we're losing this big global dominance and the kind of structure we built here in Washington to pursue that global dominance. I don't know that Trump is really aiming to give that up. In other words, I think what he's trying to do is, if I could put it this way, he's trying to be kind of like an American Gorbachev. He's trying to reshuffle the system he inherited to try to make it more survivable and make it more viable. I think instead he's becoming a catalyst where it's faster collapse. And I think that's going to have both domestic consequences and international consequences. He'd like to find, as I say, some way to put Ukraine on hold without suffering a complete defeat, so he can move on to other areas of conflict. That isn't working very well. And I think as far as the tariffs go, he's trying to preserve the hegemony of the U.S. dollar in the global financial system by essentially dictating to other countries. I don't think that's working out very well either.
One place that Trump seems to be, or at least the administration seems to be, is hung up. And I had predicted this would happen. That there's a conflict between de facto and de jure, battle lines or new borders in these negotiations, right? And I kind of predicted that where the U.S. would say, okay, let's freeze the conflict. We'll basically have a North Korea, South Korea type situation. The borders are the borders. You might have a few minor land swaps, but basically, we freeze the line of control where the battle lines are now. Everything that's in the Donbass and maybe Crimea as well, but certainly in the Donbass, Donetsk and Luhansk, etc., Ukraine officially considers to still be theirs, even though in reality they don't have control over it. In the same way that Kurdistan is officially part of Iraq, but in reality, it's de facto they don't. Or Taiwan is legally part of China, but de facto it's not. So. And it just seemed like this might be a place where the Ukrainians are the Ukrainians the holdup there? Are the Russians? Do the Russians insist on formal acknowledgement that is their territory, or is it both?
I think everybody's the holdup, but I think it's the Russians primarily because they're the ones with the whip hand on this. They're the ones who are in the strong position. And as I said earlier, unless the Russians take their stupid pills and want to take another run at Charlie Brown kicking the football on another peace agreement of the sort you described, that is not really a peace agreement. It's simply another way to freeze a conflict that will go on in one form or another, which doesn't satisfy any of the demands that they stated at the beginning of this operation, much less their broader security needs, as they stated in those two draft treaties in December of 2021 that occurred, were rejected by the West just before this current hot phase of the conflict continued. Yeah, that is obviously what the Western powers are aiming at in one form or another. And as I say, the Russians would have to be total fools to accept those.
On the other hand, if you're the Americans, you say, well, look at the Koreas, right? Yeah, there's shit balloons every now and then, but for the most part, nothing happens, right? I mean, North and South Korea have not had a hot war since the 1950s.
Sure, that's certainly what would suit Washington's needs at the moment. Again, let's back up to what the United States, still back then under the Biden administration, expected here. The Russians presented those 2 draft treaties. Biden told them to go to hell with the idea they would invade Ukraine. They would come in with shock and awe, destroy the place like we do when we go into a country. Rapidly defeat remember, everything pull out of Kyiv, all the foreign embassies, even the Ukrainian government decamped to Kyiv and went over to Lvov with the idea that the Russians would occupy the whole country. And now we've got them where we want them. Well, we've got them in a Ukrainian Afghanistan. We'll bleed them white, collapse the Russian economy with sanctions, and have regime change in Moscow. That's what they expected would happen. That's not what the Russians did. The Russians came in with a very small force. And then on their side, rather stupidly, they expected, okay, now that we show them we mean business, they'll come to the table and we'll have an agreement. We almost had an agreement in Istanbul. Well, they were smoking weed themselves, because that was never going to happen. So then when they had to say, oh, damn it, now we have to fight a real war, and they started to with several waves of mobilization, then they came in and they've been exerting the pressure, as we say, this slow grind, the meat grinder, killing off horrendous numbers of Ukrainian men, but not aiming for a knockout blow. You notice they never destroyed the bridges over the Dnieper. Why is Zelenskyy still walking around? Why is the SBU headquarters not destroyed? Why is the Rada still in operation? A lot of Russians ask these questions. Why has not Moscow actually fought this war as though they intended to win militarily? Because they still expect somebody to present them a reasonable deal. Now, that isn't going to happen, as you say, Ted. This is basically, well, will you agree to a kind of a Korea type situation? Why would the Russians agree to that?
Well, the sanctions, right? That's the West is assuming that the Russians are so crippled by sanctions that they'll do. I know they're not, because I've been there.
Yeah, exactly. So they're not, again, they have no reason to agree to this, unless the only reason they might conceivably agree to this, and people in Moscow tell me this, is that there is still a very large number of Western-oriented liberals in the Russian structures who want nothing better to go back to the status quo ante, where they can, send their kids off to posh Western schools and send their wives shopping at Harrods and all that kind of stuff, and buy things in Western. Well, that isn't going to happen. I don't think those people still have that dominating position they had before the war, but they're not inconsequential either. There's still people in Moscow who would like to do that. On the other hand, you have the power ministries who are very, very frustrated at the way the war has been fought and want to just win the damn thing and get it over with. And right now, the Russians haven't really chosen either course.
Yeah, it seems certainly, relative to, I don't know, we can say Gaza, the Russian approach has been very surgical, I think, relative to elsewhere in the world. And I think people have not only grown war weary in the U.S., but with Trump coming to office, and then we had JD Vance with that blowout, I would say knockout punch at the Oval, in March, or it was March, right? A little over a month and a half ago. I think that was a decisive blow to the image of what people thought they were dealing with in worshiping this, now unelected leader who's punted on democracy again. This so-called president of Ukraine who, it was a shock to me, and it must have been a shock to you, Jim, having worked in the halls of the Senate, to have or Congress have Nancy Pelosi unfurl a gigantic Ukrainian flag on the floor, on the House floor was appalling to me. It was almost blasphemous to see that happen. I was kind of offended, but the Democrats have remained tight in that position. Why have they stayed there? Whereas the Republicans here at home, and I'll unless you have something else, Ted, I'll make this the last question.
Go ahead.
Why have people at home kind of shifted their opinions? Is it being war weary, or have things just kind of finally been exposed and it's no longer taboo to hear the Russian side?
Well, there's a number of aspects to that. When it comes to people like Nancy Pelosi, or people who have Ukrainian flags next to their I support the current thing, whatever it is on their Twitter feed. Yeah, I mean, for them it's ideological. It has nothing to do with the real world. It has to do with virtue signaling. I mean, this is what they believe, because Vladimir Putin is Vladov Putler, and he's evil. He has to be destroyed, and there's reality has nothing to do with their worldview. It's simply standing up for what they believe is right and good, which of course is everything that's wrong and bad. I think that there's no place for this to go in terms of the way the Westerns think about Russia. As I said earlier, it's ideological for them. It's simply the division of the world into good and bad, and they can't change their course on that. Then you have other people like Steve Witkoff, who is Trump's go-to negotiator on pretty much everything. Of course, he's a fixer, he's a deal maker, he's all that kind of stuff. He can't even remember the names of the 4 oblasts that are an issue right now in Ukraine, or former Ukraine from the Russians' point of view. And you have to understand too, everything you hear from on the Russian side, if you talk to people there, is that if this war were to end with only Crimea and those 4 oblasts, there would be a lot of very upset people in Russia. What about Odessa? What about Kharkov? What about Kyiv? Because from the point of view of history, these are Russian cities. And Ukrainians have lost well over 1 million men here. I mean, it's actually horrendous the way this war has been fought. But the Russians have lost probably north of 100,000 at this point. I mean, this is well over what we lost in Vietnam. Do you really want to lose that kind of price and then settle for a quarter of a loaf in some kind of a phony deal with the West that isn't going to hold, that's going to lead to another war at some point in the future? I think there's a lot of people in Russia wondering, again, why are they fighting with one hand behind their back? Why are they not winning this war? Why are they killing a lot more Ukrainians than they need to win this war? Why are those bridges still over the Dnieper? Why is Zelenskyy still alive? These are reasonable questions if you're fighting a real war.
Yeah.
Well, what's the answer?
I think the answer is that they still haven't made up their mind. Let's suppose, for the sake of the argument, that this war of attrition continues to the point where the Ukrainian army cracks. Let's suppose the Ukrainian army just evaporated and disappeared. Do the Russians even know at this point what parts of Ukraine they still want to take into their possession? I don't think they know. I don't think they've made that decision, as far as anything I've been able to glean from my sources. They're still thinking in terms of a deal.
Do you think they're sort of playing it by ear?
Yeah, that's my best guess, yes. In other words, they're still waiting to see how things develop, what kind of offers they get from the West, what happens in terms of the attrition on the Ukrainian army, and at what point it cracks, and that they make further moves on the battlefield. I think they're, I
think the war aims are not clear internally.
My guess is that they are not. I think they probably have some idea in mind in several different scenarios about how this might proceed, whether they do take Odessa, they take Kharkov, they take Sumy, maybe they take Kyiv, or maybe they leave some kind of rump Ukrainian state that they can control through proxies. Maybe they bring Mr. Medvedchuk back and put him in power in Kyiv and have kind of like a rump Ukraine that's like a second Belarus or something like that.
Yeah, there's talks about Poroshenko coming back, maybe. And
no, not Poroshenko. Poroshenko would be just like another. Remember, when Poroshenko ran for president, he ran on a peace platform and then brought war. So that's why he was then defeated by Zelenskyy, who promised peace and then brought more war. Poroshenko, I mean, if the Russians, again, they'd really have to take their stupid pills to put Poroshenko in. Yanukovych, I don't think he has the credibility. I think it would have to be somebody like Azarov or Medvedchuk or some of the other people from former Ukrainian governments that are right now in Moscow.
Well, what of the issue of the Nazis? I mean, they're just rebranded, Jim. That was part of the initial goal of the special military operation to begin with.
Well, that's a very good point. I mean, as Ted described, if you have a North Korea, South Korea kind of arrangement, how do you do that and have denazification in what's left of Ukraine? I mean, the only way to get rid of elements like that is either to occupy all of Ukraine that you want to occupy and then get rid of those elements yourself, or to put some kind of a proxy government in under somebody trustworthy who will do what needs to be done to eradicate those elements. But there's no peace agreement you can sign with the West. They could say, oh, yes, fine, absolutely, we'll get rid of those elements. Do you trust the Europeans or the Americans to get rid of those elements if there's anything left of the Ukrainian state? Of course not.
No, absolutely not. I mean, geez, like that. Just
if I'm Russia, though, I don't want to occupy. I don't want to occupy Western Ukraine.
No, well, not
that's
Western,
where they are.
Well, no, well, let's be clear about this. People, a lot of, they tend to go from Donbass here to Western Ukraine over there. Sure, areas like Lvov, Ivano-Frankivsk, areas that were in the Austrian Empire before World War I, or inside Poland between the world wars. Yes, of course, the Russians don't want those, and Putin has made it clear they don't want those areas. But everything east of that was in the Russian Empire before World War I, or in the Soviet Union before 1939, I think it's quite realistic, and actually, if I were in Moscow, a much more realistic way to deal with those areas than to trust some kind of an order that's going to take form in there that would not end up being hostile to Russia. Unless you have direct control of those areas or very, very secure proxies, I don't see how they can trust denazification and demilitarization in those areas, which they've stated are their goals. But again, I'm not calling the shots there. You've had enough experience with the Russians, Manila, is that they're never thinking and never doing what you would think or do in their circumstances. They've always got a different perspective. Yes. And even after many decades of, experience with it, I can never quite figure them out.
Yes, that's super fair. Very true. You can never project your own, like for myself or any three of us here in this panel, we can never truly project what they might do, because we're looking, no matter what, no matter how traveled we are, no matter how versed we are, we're born and raised in the West, and our, the way we view it's our lens is we're so far removed from theirs that no matter how educated you are on it, the heart of the Russian and the lens that they're looking through is just different than ours. So I project that this will continue for a long time, Jim, at least easily until the fall. And I've been saying this over and over, easily into the fall. You don't think it'll continue?
I think it could. I hope not. Again, I think it really depends on Moscow. If they make a decision to finish this, I think they could finish it a lot sooner than that.
Oh, sure.
But if on the other hand, they're still waiting for Godot, still waiting for somebody to present a reasonable deal on the table, a deal that I cannot emphasize enough, a deal that will not be honored by their Western partners any more than any deal in the past. And if they're still waiting for that, because they've got this almost unshakable normalcy in their expectations from their psychopathic partners in the West, then they have only themselves to blame. But I think that's still their default mode. And so they'll just keep going and going like this. And it could very well take that long. And I hope it doesn't, because the death toll is just horrendous.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, for many reasons, I hope it's over, but I don't.
Yeah, I want this to be over.
I want
it to be open, but I want it to be over, but in a way that actually finishes it and
puts it to bed.
It will not lead to something worse in the very near future, which unfortunately that will happen if there's a ceasefire.
Yeah, but I mean, if Vladimir Putin hasn't learned from Minsk 1 and then Minsk 2, it's kind of shame, blame, what is it? Lie to me once, shame on me, lie to me twice.
Yeah, I mean,
or shame on you the other way.
We got to let Jim go, but I just have to observe, though, that the catch-22 here is when you're negotiating with another side and you feel that the other side has lied to you in the past, it's very tempting to just say, well, I can't trust these people. They're liars. They lied to me before. Yeah. What's to prevent them from lying again? Fair, but then why are you having negotiations then, right? Because you only negotiate with people that all they can offer you is promises that they may or may not keep. That's all they've got to give you. So, that's the catch-22.
Well, one argument for that would be, I've got other people looking on. I've got my own people. I've got, the Chinese and the rest of the world looking. I've got to at least go through the motions, even if I don't expect anything to come from it. And you may, do it because you may say, look, I know it's a bad deal. It will not be kept, but it may serve my short-term purposes to make that deal knowing it will not hold. Again, this is where maybe expectations and reality don't quite match up.
Yeah.
Right.
Jim Gatters will leave it right there. Thank you so much. Go check out his book, guys, right there. It's called I Tried to Warn You, The Collected Works of James
But
George
you didn't
Gatters.
listen.
Nobody listened.
Sorry.
But Jim, you're a dad. You already know how this goes.
I know.
Don't listen. The kids don't listen. Jim is a former U.S. diplomat with tons of experience here in Washington, and obviously with the former Soviet blocs, and you've watched it all unfold with your time on Capitol Hill. So he's trying to warn us. We should listen.
Speaking of the former Soviet bloc,
there you go.
Soviet hat pin.
There you go.
Jim,
it's my fiddle.
Pleasure.
It's my fiddle stick. It has this. Throughout the show, it's got this amazing.
Yeah, that's what kept the Soviet Union afloat.
That's funny.
And great graphics.
There you go. All right. Well, thank
you so much, Jim. I'm so glad you have the interwebs now and it works. Thank you, Elon Musk.
Thank Mr. Musk. Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. So Jim Gatters, if you're just joining us, you missed him. But James George Gatters is a DC-based attorney, political analyst, and media specialist who served as senior foreign policy advisor to the U.S. Senate Republican leadership and as a U.S. diplomat in Mexico and Soviet affairs. Currently, he's the deputy director of the American Institute in Ukraine, focusing on international affairs and legislative issues. We have a quick ad. This sponsorship is from Rumble, one that is incredibly important to the survival of the company. When Rumble first started in 2013, they built the platform for the small creator. They didn't censor or have biases. They were fair and treated all creators equally. No one thought platforms would censor political conversation or censor opinions on COVID, but they did. Facebook admitted they fell to pressure from the Biden-Harris administration. Rumble did not. They held the line. They're attacked daily for giving us a voice to talk to you. They're attacked in corporate media. They're attacked by governments like France. They're attacked by brand advertisers who refuse to work with them. Corporate America is fighting to remove speech. Rumble is fighting to keep it. Rumble won't survive with brand advertisers. They don't get much of it. Watching our show on Rumble is the most they can ask from you. But if you really believe in this fight and you have the means, one major way you can help Rumble survive is by joining Rumble Premium. Join the community that believes in the First Amendment and believes in our human right to free speech. Rumble is offering $10 off with an annual subscription. Go to rumble.com/premium. Use promo code STUDIO. Like I said, if you have the means and believe in the cause, now is the time to join Rumble Premium. If you don't have the means, we're just happy if you watch us here on Rumble. All right, so that was good. That was that was definitely it's kind of a bummer. I really do just want this to come to an end.
Of course. We can't project our hopes onto what we're actually seeing on the ground, and to the victor goes the spoils of war. And bottom line, the Russians are winning. They get to dictate the terms. And if they allow the Ukrainians to have any say at all, that is being completely generous on their end. And I would say the intransigence is coming from Zelenskyy, who keeps hanging on to power, refuses to have elections, is literally just kidnapping boys off the street, out of pizza parlors, out of bars. Let's bring this to an end. You're not going to win this, and your Western backers are starting to get shaky.
If I were Ukrainian, speaking of which, I wouldn't go out. You know what I mean?
No.
I would be staying home a lot. It's sort of like
I would go find one of those Soviet era bunkers to go hide in.
Tourists who come to the United States, don't come to the United States. You might be imprisoned and strip searched and body cavity searched,
and maybe sent to CCOT in El Salvador.
Could happen.
All expenses paid.
So it's like, it's sort of like, don't. Yeah, if I'm a Ukrainian dude between the ages of 21 and 65, I'm like, the inside's looking good. Like I'm ordering in, like, I don't need
Uber
to go
Eats,
out
man.
At all. I don't need to be walking the street. If I do walk the street, I'm using tinted windows. I'm having I'm having a lady drive the car. I'm like down on the floor of the car.
Seriously.
I'm not even kidding.
I mean, but that's the guy that Trump is supposed to sign a minerals deal with this week. I mean, that's really the guy that's literally authorizing kidnap of teenage boys off the street.
Yeah, but okay, but that's diplomacy, right? I mean, you have to negotiate with people you don't like and you don't trust, because if you liked them and you trusted them, you wouldn't have to negotiate with them. So the point is that that's just the nature of how it works. I mean, I'm sure the Ukrainians have a list of things that they're resentful about at the Russians for doing. So it's like, you have to overlook those things and just sort of, it's like Benjamin Disraeli famously said that diplomacy, like second marriages, is the triumph of hope over experience. And and that's what, diplomacy is. It's like, you can't just be saying, well, these fuckers fucked us, so fuck them. I mean, you can, but then the only solution you have then is like World War II. Like, look at Germany, like, unconditional surrender. We defeat you. But then, it's like Jim said, the Russians didn't go in heavy in Ukraine. They went in light.
Right.
And so if they wanted to destroy them, then they could have done that. But they've chosen not to go that route. So they're stuck with negotiation. They really don't have a lot of choice.
I think that
what I would do if I were the Russians, my posture would be like, let's get the Ukrainians to agree to the things we need them to agree to. Let's make sure it's very, very public and very, very clear, so that in the court of international public opinion, particularly in Western Europe, people will understand if the Ukrainians, welch on the deal.
Yes. And then what I think there's always going to be proxies that the West is going to look for. America is known for looking for the next boogeyman, and it has been Russia for the last many years during Trump 1.
We have China.
Right.
We have Iran.
So now we're moving to China and Iran. The pivot to the Pacific has been in the works since Obama.
It was radical Islam for a hot second after 9/11.
That was the whole thing with Bush Jr. President Obama, at the end of his second term, specifically indicated that there is a pivot to the Pacific. That was literally in the Obama doctrine for the second term. And then Biden kind of waffled on it. Nancy Pelosi kind of, flying over there, hanging out in Taiwan, doing whatever, despite Biden telling her, don't do it. But so we know that's been, fan the flames in China. And now we have Trump doing the same thing, but only with the trade stuff. So there's always a boogeyman. So the hot boogeyman in Vladimir Putin is over. According to Pew Research, the majority of Americans no longer view Russia as the enemy, but the Pew poll didn't offer who they think the new enemy is, because there always is one. Ted, you know that. There's always one. This particular polling was just about Americans' thoughts on Russia in particular, and it seems that the Russia hate is finally subsiding, but holding strong within the Democratic Party, Ted. And that's where, pick up your book again. Show us your book again. That's where you need to preach to them. Whoever is supposedly everything that's left of center, the Democrats, everything that's left of center, you got to explain to them, Ted. You can't be making enemies.
No,
don't
that's true.
Be making enemies.
Actually, it's really funny that you should mention that, because I literally have. I want to just show you that chapter title, because you have not seen the book yet. So,
no, I have not, but I know you.
Yeah, you do know me. It's true. Where is this line? It's
what happens when you have a radio wife.
That's true. That's true. Oh my God, where is it? Oh, here it is. Here we go.
What does it say? It says, create foreign policy for peace, not war. Yes. Make friends, not enemies.
That's right.
And that used to be the thing for everyone that was left of center, which was supposedly the Democratic Party, the party of the working man, the party of peace, the party of, like clean up the earth. Tomorrow's Earth Day, right? So that party.
Although, don't forget the EPA started under Nixon. Got to be fair.
Oh, that's fair.
Earth Day started under Nixon.
Isn't that weird? So crazy.
Well, Richard Nixon was an interesting, complicated man, and
he's a Californian, so
and a Quaker. Don't forget that.
Oh, was he a Quaker?
Yeah.
So remember he. So I'm from Whittier.
Quakers tend to be very cool and reasonable people.
Whittier is a Quaker town.
Mm-hmm. So he's so although a lot of some of the tendencies that we're seeing in the Trump administration definitely are Nixonian.
Huh.
There's some, the paranoia, the not having anyone at the table who disagrees with him, the enemies lists. That's very Nixonian, unfortunately. And then kind of not understanding, like both Nixon and Trump, basically they wanted to be like to do whatever they wanted without any buy-in, but then they also wanted to be widely beloved. And you kind of can't have both.
No.
If you're going to have if I became president, I'd be a hardcore, full-on left-wing president. And I know I wouldn't.
The whole other half of the country would hate you.
I wouldn't be beloved by the conservatives. I just wouldn't be. And you just have to accept that.
Well, you could do a Barack Obama where you can talk nice and have it seemingly 80% of the country. I mean, I don't think that's true, but it seemed like
he had
the
60%,
vast majority loved him.
60 to 65% of the country at the beginning of his term.
So people loved him, and people were like, la, 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 when you had people like me going, dude, he's bombing brown people in Yemen by this drone thing. It's like an unmanned airplane with bombs. And people were like, la, 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 he's so wonderful, Harvard, blah, 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 he's so smart, and he's black, and he plays basketball. He's so wonderful. Yay!
Mark my words, they're looking to reboot Obama, and their best bet for that is, as the Democratic nominee in 28, is Buttigieg. Similar tone, identity politics pick, very articulate, intelligent sounding, calm.
My point was that the Democrats now, Obama's lost his luster among his own party because
I wouldn't say that.
No, people. I mean, the people.
Are you kidding? He's like a god.
No, he's a god part up to the party. I should take that back. But a lot of the party has lost the true left. I'm not saying AOC is
for
that.
sure. No, the true left is like,
but a lot of the true left realized, what the fuck? This dude is like horrible. He was putting kids in cages. He was deporting. He has, up to this point, still more deportations.
I think he deported 9 million people.
Yeah, more deportations.
Trump has only deported a couple 100,000, maybe.
Summing up this. Yes. Suddenly Robbie loves Barack Obama. But the people on the
Clinton was the true deporter in chief, 12 million.
The people on the true left figured this out
numbers.
About Obama and were like, we're out. This guy sucks. I don't want to watch his Netflix shit. I don't care. Let him get divorced. Fine. She's Big Mike. Whatever. Everyone's on like the people of the left are no longer identifying with the Democrats. The Democrats are still obsessed with Obama, but the true left is like, Obama is a war hawk and a neocon. So, I don't know what you're gonna have to go preach some truth or teach some truth, Ted, to some of these people on the left.
Well, I'm trying to.
They have no fucking clue.
If only there was a book that you could read.
Ted would actually get a lot of support from the MAGA right, from which I'm a card-carrying member of.
But Trump's not even MAGA.
Correct. Well, why do you think he has so much pushback? I mean, the civil war in the Republican Party is very real and getting bigger. I'm telling you right now, if Trump would just play to his base and follow his instincts instead of the neocon bastards that own him, his movement would. He could do whatever he wanted. The Republicans would sweep the midterms. They would win. The problem is that he can't, because he surrounds himself with people who are fundamentally opposed to him. He surrounds himself with people who are opposed to the American First agenda, and that's what he does. And so that's why you have a right-winger like me who works with a communist like Ted Rall, because I just want to realize that the so-called MAGA Republicans are not my friend. And there's millions of people like me.
Right. But that is not part of the hat wearing MAGA, because that's different. rather than the people who actually believe in putting Americans first.
Well, there's different wings of America first. So the Republican version of America first means America is number one in the world. America is the hegemon. That's not the faction that I belong to. The America first I belong to is one about how about we bring back jobs? How about we we take care of the debt and the cost of living? How about we don't have all these foreign wars? Israel's not the 51st state. Ukraine's not the 52nd. Europe's not the 53rd. Hate to tell you, you're on your own. Piss off. We don't need you. Don't want you. Close the borders. If you start digging tunnels up under it, just put a couple of mines in the middle. That'll take care of the problem. I mean, you can do these things.
For the most part, I can get with that the latter part, that MAGA. For the most part, I think that's very libertarian sounding.
That's the MAGA part that Ted could win.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people on the left would say the same thing, especially that they need to focus on issues at home. At home, cost of living, education, energy prices, our local environment. Forget everywhere else. Control what's happening within our own borders. But the left is gone, and I'm gonna start that initial blame is when the Clintons rolled into town and fundamentally changed what it meant to be a Democrat. Because my whole life, I thought that's who I was. I thought I was, I grew up, I registered to vote as a Democrat initially. And when the Clintons rolled into town, they fundamentally changed the party and made it a plutocratic, self-enriching corporate party. And it's been a slow demise, and now they is dead. Deadzo.
But they're not dead.
Deadzo.
But they're not dead. That's the problem. If they were dead, we wouldn't be having this conversation because we like the Whigs would be irrelevant. They have just as much power as the corporate Republican Party does. It's a uniparty. It's WWE. It's wrestling, of course. And that's
unfortunately the left has not. The left is not completely done with the Democratic Party. That's the problem. And
right.
As long as they keep pouring, look, this past weekend we saw these hands-off rallies, the second set of them, and they were well attended. And I keep thinking of all the money and energy and time that goes into this. Those were Democratic Party organizations. In fact, the organizers like Move On did not even reach out to left-wing groups at all to have them participate. And in fact, I received reports from people who attended these rallies that their own rally organizers were turning in people. Like there was someone who threw a bottle at some Zionist protesters, and the organizers turned the woman who threw the bottle over to the police. So these are completely, corporatist kind of things. But it's a bummer because some of the people who attend these rallies are leftists. They really don't belong there, but they want to do something, and there's nothing else going on. And so but the thing is, it's like you got to start from scratch because the left has been crushed organizationally. We're there numerically, but we're not. We haven't come together and formed the club.
On that note, we can leave it there.
Let me just say this real quick, and I'll shut up and go away. The advantage that the right has had is that we've been told by the Republican Party since the Tea Party started by Ron Paul that we don't like you, we don't want you, we hate you, we despise you, we want nothing to do with you, we wash our hands of you. And so we were like, okay, fine. If your political masters tell you that they hate you, take them at their word, walk away, start your own movement, and that's what your people need to do.
Agreed.
Yeah.
But they're not there yet, unfortunately.
Ted, are you on Kim Iverson's show tonight?
I am. 6:00 Eastern time, 3:00 Pacific. Extrapolate accordingly.
Excellent.
If you're in the Maritime Provinces of Canada, that'd be 7 p.m.
Will you be live or will it be a pre-tape?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Me either.
Oh, I don't either. Yeah.
I don't know.
Hi, Kim.
So Ted may be on there.
Yes.
Ted will be there. We just don't know exactly what time.
Yes,
we're not sure. But talking about this particular issue and the political deathness or lack thereof. So anyway, all right. From the three of us, thank you guys for tuning in on this
Bye-bye.
Easter Monday. It's not Monday.
It's always
very
Monday.
sad. Well,
it's not a Monday. Yeah. Unless you're a Catholic conservative, in which case you're happy.
No, because if you're truly, I mean, I'm not even the truest of Catholics, Ted. And if you are, you should not be celebrating the death of
that's
Pope
true.
Francis,
You ought
because
not to
you
be.
have to accept him. If you are truly a Catholic, you have to accept him in the position, in the role of the Holy Father. He is the papal. He's the papacy is, you respect, like the office of the presidency, right? You don't have to like Donald Trump, but the fact that he's the president, you do owe some level of respect to the office itself.
Right.
And the papacy is kind of the same thing. So whether or not you agreed with Papa Francis, irrelevant. It's the fact that he held the papal seat. So that's that. So God bless, rest in peace. Papa Francis, man. He looked, I'll tell you this, last thing I'll say, he had kind eyes.
He did have kind eyes.
He had
very
a kind
eyes.
face.
Maybe he was a total prick, but he looked very kind.
Right. I don't know, but maybe it's the whole Jesuit thing, but he just seemed like this cute old man that you want to hug. And he wasn't, and I could see from the way he touched the babies, it wasn't just like rub their head. He held them, and there was something nurturing. So
Agreed.
When a mom sees a man that conveys that kind of I don't know, genteelness about him, I guess, when you're and you can only see that when a man is interacting with a baby.
Well, genteelness is a different thing.
Gentleness, when you can only see that from a man when he is interacting with a baby, a very small child. There's something very, very soft and warm about him, and that's, for me, was enough to say, I think this guy is a good one. I think, I may not always agree, but I think he might be one of the good people out there, perhaps. So I think we lost one, Ted. So there's that. But 88
I agree with that.
Yeah, he looked like a nice man. God bless. You guys, God bless to whoever's celebrating the.
By the way, I was
supposed
to meet him, to interview him for the book.
For the book?
I had a 3-hour interview set up with him. And then what happened was that the LA Times lawsuit was going on, and there was a hearing in my case. I was required to attend, and my lawyers asked the judge, hey, Ted's going to be hanging out with the Pope. Can we have a continuance for a week? And the LA Times refused, and the Pope, not the Pope, the judge, who was totally corrupt as shit and in the pockets of the Times, totally was like, no, you can't go.
Yeah, no continuance.
He said literally, like, your vacation's going to have to wait to Rome. It was like, it wasn't a vacation. It's journalism. I would have had fun, but like.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
They were bastards. The LA Times, man, they don't play fair.
Not even for the Pope.
No. I said that.
Well,
I said, when I talk to the Pope, I'm going to have him smite you.
Well, there you go, Ted. So that, here it is. Well, that's it. We'll be back tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern. It's Earth Day. We'll be talking some earthy stuff with Dr. Reese. I'm really curious.
I always look forward to talking to him. Yeah, go ahead.
What I'd like to know in his eyes, how Earth Day has evolved over the past 50 years.
Earth Day is not winning, man. The Earth is in bad fucking shape.
Earth is not winning.
Yeah, it's like pollution 1 million, Earth 0.
Yeah. I was gonna say give them a courtesy 1, give Earth a courtesy 1, but maybe not.
Yeah, not really. No, Earth's fucked.
All right, guys, we'll see you back here tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you smash that like button and the follow and the join and all of that stuff. And please share our content to help us grow this little channel. We'll be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern. Adios, amigos.
Bye.